Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Uriel, you're not on duty today, his comrade winked at him. Uriel raised his hand to greet him and continued to look at the pond. It was the beginning of May and something beautiful was in the air, but this man's life was the way different. It had been almost a month since he started a new lfie. And it was not about a simple desire to change a job or divorce his wife. Fate had something unenviable in store for him. A month ago, he woke up and realized that he only knew his name. He had injuries, bruises, and probably even fractures. He was sheltered by a gang of local vagrants who helped and fed him. They all lived by the laws of the street. Each had their own story behind them. However, most of them chose such a life entirely voluntarily, and there was their own sense, their own comfort, and their own drive in it. During the day, they worked like everyone else. The only difference was that those who had a home went to work in the mornings, usually to the one they hated with all their hearts, and sat in a stuffy office next to a cactus, serving their time as if in prison. The weekdays of these vagrants were much more diverse. Some just asked for alms. It was important to make such an inscription so that passers-by noticed them. Some pressed on pity, some on a sense of humor. For example, Solomon, an old-age homeless man with a huge beard and a reddish face, usually wrote that he was collecting money to invite his beloved Camila on a date. Camila sat a meter away from him. She really had a relationship with him, and on her cardboard it was said, "I will go on a date with him if he can earn money for pizza." No one passed by. Everyone was really amused and touched. Another younger homeless man raised money for rock concerts, rifles, pet owls, and his own palace. He didn't look like a man who could have a palace. Most of the homeless people still pressed on pity, but any options worked. After all, people, in essence, don't care what kind of trouble others have. They give money if they feel a burden on their souls and want to experience relief. Only personal inner motives drive them at that moment. And Uriel understood this well. He sat by the pond in the park and threw bread to the ducks. His reflection in the water gave him no information. He didn't remember who he was. All that he remembered was his name. How old is he? Who are his relatives? Is there any chance they're looking for him? Perhaps someone is shedding tears for him? With these thoughts, he was about to go to the police when he was in a good shape already. He suffered from nausea and fainting for a long time. Headaches did not go away for 2 weeks. As soon as he stood firmly on the ground, he said he was going to the police. "Go ahead," homeless woman Camila told him, "but I wouldn't advise you to do that." Uriel frowned. "Why?" "Someone must be searching for me. I must have a home, relatives. You yourself said that my clothes are not cheap." Camila took a sip of the strongly brewed tea from a cloudy liter jar. "We had one like you before. He also woke up with a head injury. Victor found him on the garbage heap, dragged him over like a kitten. Treat him," he said, "and that's it. He had no documents. We took care of him. He quickly recovered, but he didn't remember anything. He ran to the police and found out he was wanted. It turned out he had killed 3 people. Can you imagine how he felt when he found out about himself? The police caught him when he was trying to leave town." She spoke of it so detachedly, as if it were something insignificant, like shoelaces, but not a human destiny. Uriel pondered. "Camila, do you think I could kill someone?" he asked directly. She looked at him. "No, you're not a killer." He was a killer, it was evident. "But we don't judge anyone here, you know our laws. And a killer can sometimes be more human than a saint. But there are many articles in the criminal code. So think twice whether you're ready to exchange the freedom we've shown you. I'd leave everything as it is. The universe gives you a chance to start a new life. It's silly to refuse that. Most people your age would want to erase their memory and start everything anew. Live and be happy." Uriel thanked the informal leader of their group for the advice and went off to think. He never dared to enter the police station, although his feet had led him there 10 times already. He would stand at the threshold and then leave. Camila's words had firmly settled in his mind. The universe gives you a chance, take it and be happy. There were other homeless people in the gang, some richer than others. Among them were skilled card players, magicians, and pickpockets. Not everyone asked for alms. Sebastian, a young boy of 17, joined the gang after running away from his stepfather, who beat him mercilessly. He brought in money every day. He would board a bus, put on an honest face, and then rummage through people's pockets. He was so good at it that he had never been caught. He was a smart kid. He had a girlfriend, but she came from a good family. The vagrants rumored that they were in love, but the girl was afraid to tell her parents, so Sebastian had never been with them by the hot tub. That's where they would talk and pour their hearts out to each other, telling stories and supporting one another. Everyone had their own story. Camila, for example, used to own a beauty salon. Her husband was a wealthy businessman, and their family was wonderful. But things went downhill when her daughter died of cancer at a young age. Camila buried her child and looked for a reason to live, trying to throw herself into her work. Her husband, on the other hand, found another way to deal with his grief. He had a mistress, got into debt, and eventually betrayed Camila. She ran away from the police and ended up on the streets. Her beloved one had betrayed her. He burdened her with huge debts, engaged in shady dealings under her name, and left his own business unscathed. Camila had no reason to live. That's when she met Salomon. He saved her from a hopeless situation and helped her understand that there was another life, one without bureaucracy, without rules, a real life, even if it was sometimes hungry. Salomon was 10 years older than Camila, but that didn't stop them from becoming a beautiful couple. Other homeless people joined them over time. Camila took care of them all like a mother, but she was strict and unforgiving in some ways. She always spoke her mind, without flattery or false modesty. Uriel became attached to everyone in this company. In a month of his new life, he realized a lot. It was hard without his own experience, without support on anything, so he valued the advice of others and tried to listen. Sometimes at night, he would see himself in the hospital. He dreamed of some corridors, doctors, bustle. Uriel thought that perhaps he had not been in good health before. And now anything could happen. After all, he was not young anymore. As it couldn't be determined for sure, the homeless people estimated his age. Some gave him a little over 30, others said he was no less than 40. And wise Camila looked at his neck, hands, and said he was about 45. Over the years of working in a beauty salon, she learned to determine people's age without error. He also had one acquaintance outside his new street family. This happened 2 weeks ago. Uriel was sitting in the park, just like today, feeding the pigeons with breadcrumbs. A young girl approached him, sat down, took out some seeds, and also started throwing them to the birds. Then she opened a book and started reading. Uriel looked at the book with the corner of his eye and realized he had read it before. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hand with dirty nails towards the book. Of course, the stranger replied without hesitation. Uriel looked at the book and smiled. "Well, I don't remember anything about myself, but I definitely know the contents of this book. Our memory is a phenomenal thing." "Do you not remember anything?" the girl asked. They started talking. Uriel told the young and pretty girl his story, and she, whose name was Leonella, was studying to be an accountant and lived with her mother. They had their own one-room apartment nearby in this area, and the park was her favorite place since childhood. She didn't know her father, but she lived without him just fine because she had a wonderful mother. Leonella talked a lot about her mother, who had a medical education and a degree in law and worked nearby. Multifaceted, beautiful, with a good sense of humor, she never felt down and never made colleagues at work or her only daughter bored. They didn't always have enough money, so Leonella worked since she was 16 and helped her mother in any way she could. She always brought Uriel food from home, pies, cookies, cake. He felt embarrassed to take them, but it was better than not taking them and hurting her feelings. The girl was in favor of him taking the risk and going to the police. She never doubted for a second that he was a good person who had something bad happen to him, and even offered to help him search for his photo in the database of missing people. But Uriel remembered Camila's words about thanking the heavens for the chance to start his life over and not trying to remember. That evening, Uriel sat in a circle of homeless people. Among them was a man named Gandalf. He was a psychiatrist who became a patient at his own clinic. In the fall and spring, Gandalf needed the help of strangers. He became like a child, and Camila always looked after him. The rest of the time, he became the master of the universe, skillfully using hypnosis, and making money was never a problem for him. He could live in hotels, travel the country, and steal from people. Once he sold a simple stick from the side of the road for 10,000, convincing a wealthy man that it was a work of art, an ancient artifact. Now the stick is behind glass in his house, and the man tells his friends the legend that Gandalf invented about it. He knows this because he had been to the unhappy man's house. It all started when Gandalf encountered him in a cafe. The rude man was insulting the new waitress, and he had to be punished for it. Gandalf told many interesting stories. He also talked about why he prefers to sit by the fire with the homeless rather than socialize with so-called normal people. They are ordinary outrageously, and they all live by a template. It's a miracle if you meet someone who uses their head. As a psychiatrist, Gandalf claimed that anyone who can think for themselves is an outcast. You see, the thing is, he reasoned by the burning barrel, rubbing his chin. If you can think for yourself, you won't blindly go where everyone else is going. The shepherd pointed the way, and everyone followed. And if one sheep lifted its head and asked, "Why do we need to go there?" it'll immediately be considered an outcast. Normal is boring, my friends, don't change, I love you all so much. He finished his story with a smile. Applause rang out around the fire. Gandalf hadn't been a frequent visitor there lately. He had a romance with some beauty. However, Camila suspected that he had used hypnosis to make her love him, and Gandalf didn't deny it. Uriel was amazed at the different people he had met, how real they were. Each had their own difficult fate. They shared food, money, and their experiences with each other. If someone fell ill, they all chipped in for medicine. No one would search for you if you didn't come today, and no one would scold you if you came back after a year. The only thing that mattered was to remain human and follow some rules that everyone here followed. Don't steal from your own, don't abandon those in need, pay good for good, and don't judge. In the morning, Uriel went fishing. He couldn't remember if he had ever fished before, but one of the homeless people had some old fishing rods and tackle. He wanted to try it out, so he spent the whole day by the river. He got sunburned as it was a hot day and the sun was blazing. By the end of the day, he was starving. He had caught so much fish that he could sell them, but Uriel decided to do something different. He brought the catch to an old abandoned garage, which was one of the haunts of the local homeless people, cleaned the fish, and cooked it on a fire. He fed everyone and ate himself. The fish fried on the fire with salt and bread was simply incredible. "You clearly have skills, you're not a tramp," said one of the locals' vagabonds. "I guess I do. I think I know how to cook," replied Uriel. He tried to remember if he had cooked before and under what circumstances. Nothing came to mind, absolutely nothing. It was as if he had never lived before. He shook his head. Everyone was looking at him at that moment and understood that he was struggling without his memories. "You know, I wish I could remember something, anything. Will I really live my whole life like this?" Camila sighed. "There are memories that don't let us live. I envy you. If I could, I would erase everything from my memory, the wedding with that traitor, and the birth of my beloved daughter, whom I later buried. And who wouldn't erase them?" The question was rhetorical, but most of the vagrants said they would, because memory is only a support when there are no heavy, soul-crushing memories. "But I wouldn't," Vitoldo said, embracing his wife. She laughed out loud, revealing a row of yellow teeth. "Why not?" Or don't you want to forget how your sons wanted to kill you to take away the apartment? Camila squinted, taking a puff. Vitoldo waved his hand good-naturedly. I know how to forgive and forget. Besides, if it weren't for their treachery, I would never have met my Irma, and he kissed her in such a way that Uriel even felt awkward and lowered his eyes. Uriel knew that Vitoldo was a splendid artist who taught painting at the university. His two sons grew up on his money, and one fine day they decided that their father's expensive apartment, money for which he had earned himself, should belong to them. Vitoldo's wife died when the boys were very young. Their relationships were strained, they didn't get along with each other, and they constantly quarreled with their father, competing with each other. With time, their dislike only grew stronger. They began to talk about who would inherit his apartment after his death. The boys bluntly said that they wanted their father to go and paint somewhere in the countryside, not interfere with their life in the city. That day, Vitoldo saw how they put poison in his tea. He didn't drink it. He just put the keys on the table and left forever. The pain of being so unwanted to his sons that they were willing to kill him drove him to drink. He ended up on the street without documents or the desire to live. Salomon found him and brought him to the campfire. That's how he became a part of the band. When the conversation about the benefits of forgetting faded away, the vagabonds began to disperse. Uriel lay down on the clothes that he considered his bed and began to snore. His stomach didn't growl louder than the noise of the cars on the highway that evening. He thought he should go fishing tomorrow, but he regretted not having a shovel. He had to dig for worms with his hands today, and he had cut his fingers until another homeless man brought him a spoon. Fishing calmed him down and fed everyone. It felt good to be useful. These people had done a lot for him, and he felt obligated to them. However, he planned to spend the next day differently. In the morning, Uriel went to the pond, undressed, and washed himself. He spread out his clothes, which smelled like fish. Then he went to the garages, took a small thin book, and went to the park. By the time he arrived, his clothes were already dry and almost clean. He didn't have laundry detergent, but he had a soap. The water in the pond was cold in the mornings, but he couldn't walk around dirty, especially on the day he was supposed to meet her. Leonella had promised to come to the park today. Leonella was already standing by the pond with a book in her hand. Uriel approached her with a smile. He was a quarter of a century older than her and had no other feelings for her than just friendship. She was kind, like a human being. Everyone runs away from the homeless. No one wants someone else's pain. Everyone has their own. But she listened, didn't recoil, wasn't afraid, and was willing to talk to him. She talked about herself. Uriel thought she was too modest and probably didn't have many friends. "Hello, I just got here. How are you?" she asked, smiling. "Great, Leonella. How are you doing? How's your mom?" he asked. The girl was wearing a light floral dress. She was slim and pretty, with shoulder-length blonde hair pulled back into a braid. She was wearing sandals. Her earrings were tiny gold ones, and she didn't change them, it seemed. There were no other decorations. She was natural, without makeup. Maybe not a beauty, just an ordinary girl. "I'm fine, thanks. She sends her regards and some pastries." Leonella handed him a bag. "What's that you have?" the vagabond asked, pointing to the book. "You said you'd bring my book today, but I brought another one for you." "It's similar to the one you read," said Leonella. They exchanged books and sat down on a bench. The glares from the water blinded their eyes, creating a feeling that everyone had experienced in childhood: carefree, freedom, contemplation. When no fears or worries come to mind, and the mood is always great. "Well, I promised to finish reading this book in 4 days. Can you give me 4 days?" Uriel asked, evaluating the thickness of the edition and the font. "Okay. So we'll meet again on Wednesday at the same place," Leonella said. They chatted a little more before parting ways. Leonella told Uriel that she had aced her exam at the institute. And Uriel talked about fishing and Gandalf. She was interested in him. Uriel himself realized that he was good at keeping a conversation going, and he had his own opinion on everything, but he couldn't remember where it came from. Sometimes snippets of phrases slipped through his mind. He vividly remembered the sleeve of a purple sweater with big buttons that were in fashion 40 years ago. Uriel decided that this was a childhood memory. Perhaps his mother or grandmother wore such a sweater. Thinking about his parents, he flinched every time, and his legs carried him to the police station. But at the doorstep, another thought hit him. What if he didn't have parents, but instead had a criminal record? What if he didn't like what he found out about himself? During the 4 days that Uriel read Leonella's book, he met Gandalf. They accidentally ran into each other on the square. Uriel was already leaving, and Gandalf was walking hand in hand with a beautiful blonde. "Hey, buddy, how are things? How's the pack?" he asked, referring to everyone who sat around the burning barrel in the evenings. "Not bad, both me and the pack." "And you?" Uriel asked, not expecting Gandalf to greet him so warmly. "I'm good too. Camilla told me your story. And you know, I don't agree with her. Yes, it's scary to find out something about yourself. No matter what events led you to the vagrants by the fire, it's your life. And you shouldn't judge yourself harshly," Gandalf said. Uriel shrugged. "The main thing is that the court won't judge me harshly if it turns out that I killed or robbed someone." Gandalf burst out laughing. "Your sense of humor will save you, bro. Without it, we're nobody in this life. You have the hands of a doctor," he suddenly said. Uriel looked at his hands. "Where did you get that idea?" he asked. "I don't know. I have a lot of knowledge in my head about human psychology and physiology, and I'm sure you were a doctor. There are many things about you that suggest it. And I can also tell you for sure that you weren't alone in your family. You're used to taking care of others, but you don't seem like a family man. Rather, you're someone who has dedicated himself to work. There are no signs of unhealthy psychology in you. You're not a maniac or a psychopath, and you don't need to know anything else." Uriel was surprised. In this moment he heard more information about himself than he knew himself. And why hadn't he thought to ask a psychiatrist before if he considered himself a criminal? "Wow, you really are Gandalf," he exclaimed. Gandalf patted Uriel on the back, smiling. "We're going to the cinema. Do you want to come with us? I'll pay." Uriel declined. He hurried back to his place. The sky was tearing apart with thunder, and it had already started to drizzle. That meant it would be cool outside. When he returned to the garage, he found only Salomon there. He was already lying down, petting the dog that the homeless people were feeding. They exchanged a few words. Uriel lit a candle that he had specifically bought so he could read in the evenings, and immersed himself in reading. But every time the homeless people came and went, the candle went out with a gust of wind, and he had to light it again with a lighter. The rain drummed loudly on the garage roof, and the drops were huge. 2 more people had managed to return to the garage before the rain started, and now they were all occupying their places on the makeshift beds. Those who wanted to sleep turned their backs to the wall and dozed off. No one thought to say, "Hey, turn off your candle, it's bothering us." On the contrary, the light made the inside feel somehow cozier. The candle didn't give off much warmth, but 2 vagrants pulled out some cards and started playing. A few days later, Uriel was swimming in the pond again. When he arrived at the garage, he was shaking with cold. The weather outside was chilly, with hardly any sun visible, and the wind never ceased. "You'll catch a cold and die. Have you forgotten that homeless people have no way to treat lung inflammation?" One of the regular garage dwellers asked him. "I haven't forgotten," Uriel grumbled, pulling his book out of its hiding place. It was important not to forget it and not to get it dirty. "And, by the way, I know how to treat lung inflammation. I don't know where I learned it from, but I definitely know it." Maybe Gandalf was right. Maybe I'm really a doctor. Uriel took out the book. Leonella shook it off and headed for the exit. Hey, buddy, grab a cigarette on the way, a vagrant, sprawling in the corner on a pile of things, asked him. I'll certainly do it, but smoking will kill you much faster than swimming in cold water. People, especially homeless, don't recover from lung cancer. Uriel said this and left, leaving his companion time to think. Camilla was inside too. She shook her head. This one won't stay here. He's not free like we are. His habits are still back there, and that life, sooner or later he'll remember them. Uriel came to the park and settled in their spot. The wind had picked up, but his clothes had dried, and he wasn't cold anymore. He waited for Leonella for almost an hour, then went back to the exit. Not that he was in a hurry anywhere, he just decided to take a walk in the park and come back. What if she's waiting for him somewhere else? He couldn't wait to tell her about what Gandalf had said to him. He had thought a lot about everything and decided he would go to the police. He would definitely go as soon as he had enough strength and determination. At the park exit, Uriel spotted a familiar silhouette. Leonella was hurrying, running as fast as she could. She saw him too and waved her hand, crossing the road. Uriel smiled and raised his hand to wave back, but at that moment, he saw a car speeding straight toward the girl at an enormous speed. He tried to cry out, trying to shout a warning, but the car was too close. At that moment, something clicked in Uriel's mind. He didn't understand what it was, but memories flooded into his consciousness. He didn't have time to dwell on them, and Uriel ran across the street towards her. By the time he arrived, a crowd had gathered around her, and someone was examining the girl. The driver of the car stood to the side, looking distraught as he spoke on the phone. He was a young man who explained that he was rushing to get to the hospital where his wife was giving birth. Is she alive? Did you call an ambulance? He asked the woman sitting next to Leonella. One of the bystanders responded that the ambulance had already been called. Why, Leonella? Why? Uriel whispered, tears streaming down his face. Soon, the doctors arrived. I know this girl. Can I come with you? He asked. I know her too, everyone does. She's the daughter of our nurse. And who are you to her? The woman in the white coat asked as they lifted Leonella onto the stretcher and into the ambulance. I'm her acquaintance, Uriel responded. Suddenly, Uriel realized that he knew where they were taking the girl and ran after the ambulance. He walked, he ran, he walked again. He was tormented by pain. In his hand was a small book, her book, which he had read. He was thinking that it was his fault that she had been hit by the car. If he had waited for her at the pond, she wouldn't have seen him, wouldn't have stopped to wave, and would have stayed healthy. Uriel finally arrived at the hospital and stood at the entrance, taking a moment to catch his breath. Are you okay? One of the orderlies, who were smoking on the side, asked. No, I just ran, Uriel replied, stretching out his hand. They turned away and continued their conversation. And that girl, is she really Adelaida's daughter? One of them asked. Yep, her only child. She lives only for her, and right now she's with her. Adelaida is a good woman, it's such a pity, the man said, taking a drag of his cigarette. Having finished smoking, they all went back inside. Uriel caught his breath. He didn't understand what was happening to him at that moment. Fragments of their phrases were flashing in his head. Adelaida's daughter, they could have saved her in the capital, surgeon. He shook his head and, obeying his inner instincts, went inside. Uriel walked down the hallway and knew exactly where his feet were leading him. The orderlies were talking about surgery, and Uriel understood what needed to be done. All the necessary knowledge flooded back into his mind. He remembered performing dozens of surgeries, sometimes for 24 hours straight if necessary. He also remembered the corridors of this hospital. He had worked here before. Uriel entered the operating room and walked confidently to where he used to put on his gown. Everything was in its place. He put on a sterile suit and disinfected his hands. He put on gloves, a mask, and a cap. Upon leaving, he stopped a nurse. "Where's my patient? I will be performing the surgery. Please take me to her immediately," he said. The nurse raised her eyebrows. "Oh, you must be the one they called for Adelaida's daughter. All right, follow me. She was just prepped for surgery. The anesthesiologist is already in there. I thought our surgeon was coming." "No, I will be performing the surgery." Uriel entered the surgery room with his usual composure. Leonella lay on the table. He remembered leaving her book in the staff room. Memories overlapped each other. Something inside him clicked into place. He realized that he now remembered everything that had happened to him, but there was no time to dwell on memories. He needed to save the girl. The hospital doctor reported the results of her examination and named Uriel all the parameters of her assessment, everything as it should be. Uriel evaluated her condition as extremely severe and understood what needed to be done. The light in the operating room came on, the nurses rushed in, and anesthesia was injected. Uriel noticed out of the corner of his eye that the surgical nurse was looking at him with wide eyes. He knew her, but he didn't have time to remember who she was. However, there was a strong feeling that he would remember these details now. Memories flooded into his consciousness at the right time. Perhaps if the car hadn't hit the sweet girl in front of his eyes, he wouldn't have remembered anything. "Scalpel," he commanded. Uriel issued orders fiercely and did his job very meticulously. When the girl's pulse was lost, he almost shouted at the assistant for his incompetence. Pulse restored, came the voice from behind. Uriel glanced at the monitor. "Excellent, let's continue." He performed the most complicated operation, knowing that he lacked the equipment he was used to. However, his skill and speed did the job. He skillfully stitched up the torn vessels, as no specialist in their hospital had done before. Behind him, the nurses asked each other who this surgeon was. No one understood who he was, except for one single nurse who was barely holding back tears. She was afraid to cry because Uriel easily raised his voice if something went wrong. "It's useless, the pulse continues to drop, too much damage," the assistant said. "Shut up and do your job," Uriel growled. At that moment, a young specialist from the hospital walked back and forth outside the operating room. "Who is this surgeon?" he asked the chief physician. "I don't know, apparently Adelaida asked someone from another hospital. I'm not sure myself. But you arrived too late, they would have taken the girl to the morgue by now, and he's working," the woman with black hair and glasses said. "Let him work, he'll come out and we'll figure it out," she added. Meanwhile, there was silence and tension in the operating room, comparable only to a reactor meltdown. Uriel had scared everyone with his behavior so much that no one dared to sigh unnecessarily. "Done, if her body can handle it, she'll live," Uriel said, looking at Leonella's face. She was pale, her lips dry, and a large blue bruise adorned her face. Suddenly, applause broke out around Uriel. He began to turn around, not understanding what was happening. "What? Am I an artist to you? Or did I land a plane?" he protested. "You saved her, she was doomed. Please, tell us, for God's sake, that you'll work in our hospital," one of the nurses pleaded. Uriel took off his gloves and pulled down his mask. At that moment, everyone's eyes widened. "Is it you? You? Here? But how did you end up in our hospital?" the assistant asked, coming to his senses. Uriel frowned. At that moment, memories flooded his mind. He graduated from medical school here, in the suburbs of the capital, and came to this very hospital to do his internship. He was already well over 20 years old. Even then, he felt a tremendous passion for medicine and was doing an internship with a local surgeon. One of their nurses, who had just started working at the hospital, seemed to him a very attractive person. Uriel did not want a family then, he did not need any relationships at all. In college, he experienced a hard breakup. His first love cheated on him with his best friend. Having lost two close people, Uriel immersed himself in his studies and did not leave any room in his life for feelings. However, this girl captivated him with her beauty and unapproachability. She was liked by everyone, but did not reciprocate anyone. Everyone thought she already had a partner, but she did not tell anyone about her personal life. And the beauty's name was Adelaida. By the end of the internship, they had a passionate romance. Adelaida was so in love that she was ready to die for Uriel. He was also quite fascinated with the girl. On the day Uriel came to Adelaida to tell her the happy news, everything went wrong. "My love, I have been waiting for you for so long. I have news." Adelaida rushed to him and hugged him. Uriel embraced her. He had so many emotions at that time that he could not hold back and spoke first. "And I have good news too. They are taking me to a clinic in the capital. I will be able to work with the country's top specialists. They just called me today. Our doctor told them about my successes at the seminar, praised me, and it bore fruit. Can you imagine? They almost had a fight because of me with another clinic in the capital." Adelaida stopped smiling and looked seriously at her beloved. "What about us? What about me?" she asked. "I'll take you with me. We'll rent an apartment, live together, maybe start with a room, start getting ready," he replied. The girl shook her head. "You know that my father is sick." "I didn't know my mother, but my father has been ill for a long time. I went into medicine just to be able to treat him. He won't be able to manage without me, physically. You're a doctor, you should understand," she pleaded, looking at him. But Uriel had already forgotten whatever she had wanted to say at the beginning. "But you don't want me to give up on an opportunity I've been working towards for years, do you? I've lived for this, devoted everything to it. You have to understand, I won't be able to take both you and him there. Everything is expensive in the capital, and I'm just a poor student. I have nothing but my knowledge and the experience I've gained on this internship. I'm not saying I'll leave you, my angel. If that's the case, I'll just go alone, and when I can, I'll move you and your father there." Adelaida shook her head and took a step back. "So, we're just not on the way?" "What are you talking about?" Uriel asked. A tear glistened in her eye. "Everything has changed. It's either you're with me or not, choose." At that moment, she didn't mention that she was expecting Uriel's child. She didn't want her pregnancy to be the deciding factor. What mattered to her was for him to stay here for her. Then it would mean that she was more important to him than his work or prestige. After all, he could work here, in this hospital, near her. Essentially, it was only a question of what was more important to him, the capital and money, or a simple nurse who loved him more than life. "Adelaida, but this is important for you too. Don't you want me to have a good job? There's better equipment there, better experience. I can save lives, that's what I was born for. You can't do this to me. It's you who can't do this to me. Why don't you want to just wait a year? I'm only asking you to stay for a year. If two clinics fought over you, they'll wait for you." Her hormones were already starting to affect her. She was calm previously, but today she was having a meltdown. "Why can't we just have a long-distance relationship for this year? You have to understand, I may never get such an opportunity again. You're asking a lot of me. I won't leave you unless you want to break up with me. But I'll go, and you can come with me or stay. I love you." He turned around and walked away. "So, you're leaving?" she asked, choking back sobs. "I'm leaving. Come to the station the day after tomorrow at 3, and I'll know that you're with me and love me. And if you don't come, then that's it." And he left. Adelaida was angry. She had firmly decided that she wouldn't go anywhere. The hurt was boiling inside her. On the day Uriel left, she told her father about her pregnancy. He had difficulty walking and was disabled. "I'm not holding you back. Go, you have a family. Why didn't you tell me right away?" Adelaida shook her head. She adored her father. He was everything to her. No, I won't go, not for anything. I won't go without you. I can't. You know there are graves of your mother and my parents here. Here are our friends. Here is our home, and I grew up in this yard. Dear, you have to go with him. No, he doesn't understand that I have a more compelling reason not to leave than he does to stay. He just doesn't love me. He has to know about the child. You haven't told him, and he's a good guy. He didn't leave you. You probably just quarreled with him and didn't support him, but it's also an important moment for him. Adelaida, he has a right to know about the child. Tell him. And if he leaves, then we'll raise the child ourselves. We'll manage, as I managed to raise you alone. Adelaida pondered. It was the beginning of 3 o'clock. She bolted and ran. There were traffic jams on the roads. It would have been a mistake to go on a public transport. She arrived at the station late. His train had already left. She watched him go. Yes, if mobile phones had existed then, like they do now, she would have just sent him a message, and he wouldn't have gone anywhere. She was sure that he would stay because of the child, but she wanted him to stay because of her. As she was leaving the platform, she suddenly noticed a man with a suitcase in the crowd. From the back, it seemed like it was him. Uriel, Uriel, you didn't go, you stayed. She flew to him and almost hugged him, but the man looked at her and smiled. You must have mistaken me for someone else, I'm afraid, he said. Yes, that's right, I'm sorry. Adelaida sighed heavily. It was the end. She told her father that she had told Uriel about the baby, but he didn't want to stay. She lied to avoid further questions. It was her decision to keep quiet and stay. It hurt her that he had traded her love, such great and strong love, for a job in the capital city clinic. For Adelaida, it was like betrayal back then. She gave birth to a daughter on time and named her Leonella. Adelaida cherished her daughter's soul and was happy even in the toughest times. Her father lived for another 4 years. He looked after the baby when Adelaida worked at the hospital, but his strength was rapidly fading away. Leonella was already attending daycare when he passed away. She barely remembered her grandfather. Life went on and on. Uriel turned his love experiences into good deeds. He worked tirelessly so he wouldn't have time to think. They called him a robot at the clinic, but it yielded results. Soon, he was lured by another clinic, an expensive one. He didn't want to just earn money. His ambition was to save lives, so he worked there and at the old clinic without weekends or holidays. Only thanks to the hospital's chief forcing him to have vacations, Uriel had annual trips abroad. He had a lot of money. He traveled to different countries, but he tried not to abandon his practice. Uriel helped children in Africa, traveled around the world, taught young doctors, and took on complex cases. There were different stories in his medical practice. Sometimes he couldn't save a patient, and he suffered. At first, he felt responsible for those he couldn't save. He thought he personally killed them and didn't save them. In those moments, he wanted to leave, but there were wise doctors who reminded him that there was no surgeon who could save all their patients. They weren't magicians, they were just doing their job. A few years ago, Uriel was invited to a TV show as one of the country's best surgeons. He talked about cases from his practice, answered questions about the program's topic, but refused to advertise mayonnaise or medicine. He received many such offers, but he was already so in demand and popular that he could refuse. Memories suddenly shut off as if by a snap. Uriel came to his senses and stared at those around him. He was holding his mask, and everyone could see his face. Of course, not everyone watched the health program on Sundays. But those who moved in these circles undoubtedly knew him by sight, and one of the nurses at this hospital knew Uriel personally. She too took off her mask and looked at him with tears in her eyes. Now he allowed his memory to fully enter his consciousness. Before that, he had only let memories of his profession, what was necessary to him, into himself, but now he was fully back to himself. He is not a criminal, he is a surgeon. Why are you staring like that? He asked sternly. Take the girl to the intensive care unit. She'll be there for a while. And make sure someone keeps an eye on her, understood? Everyone rushed off, returning to their usual tasks. Uriel was not a tyrant, but he demanded the highest level of competence from his staff because sometimes a nurse's delay could cost someone their life. He couldn't afford such mistakes. Everyone dispersed, and only Adelaida remained in the operating room. She stood still. None of the staff remembered that she had once dated the now famous doctor. "Don't you remember me?" she asked. "How could I forget? Everyone thought you were dead. You disappeared without a trace. The newspapers wrote that you committed financial fraud and either took your own life or left the country. But they couldn't find you. I've been reading the news all the time." "Why?" Uriel asked gently, feeling his palms sweat. There were women and dates in his life, but very few. And he immediately warned that he had no plans to start a family and was only ready for a short fling without commitment. There were madams who agreed to that. Uriel took them to restaurants, they chatted, watched movies together at home. But such romances ended as soon as the lady wanted more. "I was just afraid that I would see news of your death." Uriel smiled. "I almost died. It's a long story. Only the accident that happened before my eyes helped me regain my memory. I didn't remember anything this whole month, absolutely nothing." There was a pause. Adelaida sighed, and Uriel was already about to pass her by. "You saved your daughter today," she said quickly and closed her eyes. "What?" Uriel returned, looked at her, took her by the shoulders. Adelaida looked at him guiltily. She was as beautiful as she was 20 years ago. "She's your daughter. Why didn't you tell me? How could you not tell me? My daughter, my God, my daughter met me by chance and fed me pastries." "So you're the bum she went to the park to see?" Adelaida smiled, appreciating the irony of higher powers. The hospital administrator walked into the office and saw the famous surgeon. "So you performed the surgery? I didn't know you were sent to us." "No one sent me. I just happened to witness the accident and saved the girl." "You didn't have a surgeon on site, did you?" he said sternly. "I understand. Come to me, we'll discuss payment for your overtime." "I don't need anything," said Uriel and left. He found himself on the street. On the porch, the young medics were discussing the news that a famous doctor was currently in their clinic. They were telling how he appeared out of nowhere and saved a patient's life. Uriel walked down the road, his mind filled with so many emotions. He had a daughter, and she was beautiful. Of course, that's what he had found in her, that's why she had seemed so familiar to him all this time. She was an exact copy of his late mother, the one who wore a lavender sweater with large buttons. Now everything finally fell into place. He reached the garage, staggering, and lay down in his spot. He didn't speak to anyone and didn't even look at anyone. There were a few more people in the garage. "Uriel, what about the cigarette? I asked you. You didn't bring it?" his friend asked. Uriel didn't react. "Shut up. Can't you see?" Camilla pushed the vagrant in the ribs with her elbow. "What should I see?" he asked, not understanding what he was being hit for. "He gained his memory back," she said. In the morning, Uriel woke up, and the memories started swirling in his head again. Camilla was sitting next to him with a jar of tea. "Want some?" she asked. Uriel nodded. He thought that he had sat here with her like this for the last time, in this unsanitary place, drinking this tea. Despite everything, the drink was delicious, very delicious. "How did you know that I remembered everything yesterday?" he asked. "By the way you looked at everything, you had a completely different look. You were no longer the person we found a month ago. Maybe you can tell me who you are?" she asked. "I'm a surgeon, and yesterday I performed surgery on my daughter." I'm wealthy and I haven't killed anyone, but the hospital's chief doctor stole sponsorship money and wanted to blame it all on me. He didn't like that everyone knew me by face, but not him. My fame disturbed him, and he manipulated the documents. I threatened to call the police and turned away from him, but he hit me from behind. Apparently, he hit me some more, but he didn't finish the job. He is weak, he's not a surgeon or a doctor, he's just a bureaucratic rat, he explained. Well, I'm glad it's like that. Anyway, be happy, and if you want to sit by the fire, we're always happy to have you, she said. Uriel left. He walked down the street and realized that his life was changing at that very moment. He knew what to do with the chief doctor of the clinic. He knew where to get evidence of his illegal actions and was confident that the scoundrel would soon get what he deserved. It was harder to understand what to do with Adelaida and Leonella. Uriel was worried about his daughter. Arriving at the hospital, he walked inside, and everyone there looked at him like a ghost. But he put on a coat, washed his hands, and entered the intensive care unit. Leonella was in consciousness. "Hello," she said slowly. "Don't talk, my dear. You shouldn't waste your energy on conversations right now. I came to visit you," he said. Then the senior sister of the department entered the intensive care unit. "How is the patient doing? How was the night?" he asked seriously. Everything was fine, and she has a positive dynamic. "When can she be transferred from the intensive care unit?" the nurse asked. Uriel adjusted his coat and looked at the woman as if she were crazy. "What? She'll be here for at least 3 more days, minimum. And where did they teach you such things?" he asked. The woman said she understood and left, lowering her head. Uriel turned to Leonella. "You see, we have to teach everything to these people. The operation was complicated. We collected you piece by piece," he said. He saw that Leonella was trying to ask something, but he stopped her with a gesture. "Don't say anything now. I understand you have a lot of questions. I'll tell you briefly, and when you recover, I'll give you all the details. When I saw the car hit you, I remembered everything. I ran through the city for an ambulance. I'm a surgeon, my hands remember everything. I have a lot of experience, years of practice, and I just went into the operating room and performed the surgery. So now I'm not a homeless person anymore. I'm myself again. You were right when you suggested me to go to the police. They would have recognized me quickly, but I don't know when I would have remembered everything. Anyway, don't worry, I'll come by today and tomorrow, and I'll visit you every day. And you just focus on getting better." Uriel turned around and was almost at the door when he heard behind him, "Are you my father?" He turned around and looked sternly at her. "Did your mother tell you?" "She had to. She stayed with me all night." Uriel shook his head. "She didn't think about the fact that you couldn't handle the news. Leonella, right now it doesn't matter whose father I am. What matters is that you don't get nervous and that you recover. Your body is healing a lot of tissues at the same time. You have 2 fractures, one in your rib and one in your wrist. You would have bled out if I hadn't remembered anything. But your organs are not affected, they are bruised, but it's not fatal. You can't strain your nervous system right now. Don't think about this situation, think about your health. And I'm not going anywhere now. I didn't know I had a daughter. Like you, I knew nothing. Adelaida didn't tell me. But we won't blame anyone, we'll just keep living. And I promise you, I'll always be by your side." He really wanted to hug her. Uriel left the intensive care unit and immediately ran into Adelaida. "Hello," she muttered, apparently intending to go to her daughter. "Come with me," he said sternly. They left the hospital and walked away to ensure that no one could hear their conversation. "You know, I have a lot of questions for you, but the first one is, why don't you want your daughter to recover?" Uriel furrowed his brow. "What? What do you mean? How could you even say that?" Adelaida was taken aback. Why did you tell her right after the operation? Are you out of your mind? He asked. She wasn't unconscious the whole time. When you walked into the room, she saw you and asked if it was true that a homeless person had operated on her. I had to tell her everything, Adelaida explained. Uriel looked up at the clear blue sky, watching birds fly by. Then maybe you can tell me why I didn't know that I had a daughter, he said, looking back at her with so much pain in his eyes that Adelaida felt uneasy. You chose the capital city over me. I didn't want to hold you back with a child, Adelaida said defensively. I didn't abandon you. You didn't want to come with me, wait for me, or even have a long-distance relationship for a while. Millions of families live like that, with a husband and wife working in different cities. How could you do this? You ruined our lives. Uriel exclaimed. You could have stayed for me. I saw that you needed me more than I needed you. You were more passionate about medicine than about me, and I was jealous. Couldn't you have done this for me? Stayed for just 1 year. Then I would have told you, Adelaida said, pleading. Uriel sighed heavily. You were jealous of my work? He smiled. Forgive me, he said, looking into her loving eyes. It was only now that he realized that he had always loved her, and those feelings had subsided but never disappeared from his soul. It's me who should ask for forgiveness, Adelaida said. Uriel told Adelaida his entire story, and she sent him to her apartment, gave him keys and money for the road. He shaved, took a shower, and did his laundry. There was so much to do, and he didn't know where to start. Should he begin by restoring his passport or going to the police? He was more worried about Leonela still being weak and leaving both hospitals without a surgeon for a month. How many people had he not saved in that time? Uriel called his contact at the capital hospital and explained the situation. The person sent him money, which Adelaida transferred to him. In the evening, he returned to Leonela's hospital, visited her, and left for the capital city. You're leaving again, Adelaida said, standing at the hospital's entrance. I promise I'll come back, he said. I've heard this before. History repeats itself. Someone up there is playing a cruel joke on us. I won't wait. He came closer to her and kissed her on the lips. She didn't resist and kissed him back. You've been waiting for me all these years, just like I've been waiting for you. I never got married, you know. And Leonela told me that her mother was never married either. I'll be back. They said goodbye and Uriel left. When he arrived in the capital near his home, he almost lost his vision from the flashes of cameras. He had been searched for by the entire country. But there was no time for interviews now. I will hold a press conference and answer all your questions, gentlemen. I will tell you an amazing story. But now I have to get my affairs in order. The people responsible for my disappearance must pay and answer to the law. And I ask you not to publish my words until tomorrow, otherwise the police won't have time to catch the criminal. Journalists are also human beings, and all of them have occasionally had to see doctors. None of them released any news until the morning. That same evening, the police arrested the chief doctor of the private clinic where Uriel worked. A few days later, Leonela was watching TV. Her mother had brought it straight from their home. She saw a program where her father talked about how someone tried to frame him and how he lived with amnesia among the homeless in the suburbs. However, he didn't tell anyone that he had a daughter, which made Leonela feel hurt. He promised to be there and come back, said Leonela. A month had passed, and Leonela was already discharged and was receiving treatment at home. There was a change in leadership at the hospital where Adelaida worked. The new administration was about to enter the doors, and everyone was gathered early in the morning before the start of the workday. "Where is our supervisor?" whispered one nurse. "She's been retired for years now. It's time to give way to the young," replied a colleague. The door opened, and Uriel entered the hospital with the city mayor. "Meet your new director. He agreed to head our hospital and continue performing complex surgeries for patients. Adelaida couldn't hide her surprise. Uriel approached her in an elegant suit and handed her red roses wrapped in paper. "Let me make it clear right away. This is my wife, Adelaida. We have a daughter, Leonella, whom you all know. So that you can work peacefully and not be distracted by gossip, I'm laying my cards on the table. I hope for productive cooperation because we all have one goal: to save lives." "Why did you leave everything behind and move here?" someone from the hospital staff asked. "Because my wife lives here," Uriel replied. When everyone left, Uriel and Adelaida stayed behind. "Wife? You could have asked me first," she protested. "Will you marry me?" Uriel asked. It was evident to him that all this time, as he finished his work in the capital, testified in court against the former head of the private clinic, he was only thinking about Adelaida. He continued to work, not sleeping or eating properly. It was important for him to finish what he had started so many years ago. "I will," Adelaida smiled. It was evident to her too. They had made mistakes in their youth, but now everything had ended as it should have. They would be together. "Then wouldn't you mind moving in with me? I bought an apartment here, and Leonella could live in yours. It's closer to her work," Uriel said. "Of course, but only after her full recovery," Adelaida agreed. "Of course. You know, I'm no longer young enough to be torn between two clinics and TV shows. I can't say I regret leaving back then. I saved a lot of lives. But it's time for me to come back home. And my home is you. It has always been that way." That evening they spent together, as a whole family, for the first time. Uriel told Leonella his story about how things were with his mom. They talked for hours until late at night. Adelaida fed them all with delicious salads and pies. "How could I not recognize your pies?" he smiled. "So many years have passed," Adelaida replied. "Yes, but the pies are still as delicious as ever. You used to bake them for me, and I always asked for more. Remember?" "I do." That night they fell asleep together, embracing each other, and both felt that everything had finally fallen into place, everything had been resolved. They understood that this was the end of their wandering and loneliness, and that a new life was beginning for them. They had managed to do the impossible, to go back 20 years, to where it all began. They went on dates, he gave her flowers, and she was still shy and in love with him madly.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.